Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Inclusively webinar, hosted by Lewis Insight and Sensafili. Our topic today, Building Inclusion into BT, with speakers Kevin Lee, Chief Digital Officer, BT Consumer, Chris Lewis, Founding Director of Lewis Insight, and Monica Paolini, Principal at Sensafili. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. We'd like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. Please share your comments and questions using the Q&A and chat functions on the Zoom taskbar. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they become relevant to the topics being discussed, so please do not hold your questions until the end. And with that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks, Kevin, for being with us today, and for you in the audience to participate. We look forward to have this one as a real conversation with you as well. So feel free to speak up, comment, ask questions as much as you can. Before we get into today's discussion, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about Inclusively. We started it, Chris and I started it recently after talking about it for a long time. And as we go along, we're still trying to figure out what will be. So when people say, what is Inclusively? It's basically what we're trying to do is to create a place where we can talk and about solutions, about how to move forward to make telecoms more inclusive and more diverse. Do we have the answers to everything? No, we don't. That's why we're doing this, because we want to see what other people are doing, what is that how can we move forward? And we had our first event was with Tarek Amin at Rakuten, the CEO of Rakuten. And you can listen and watch it online or read the transcript. And then we had one on March 8th on women's, so gender role. And today we're talking to Kevin Lee from BT, and we have many more events coming up next. And we have one at Mobile World Congress as well. So with that, I'm going to let Chris introduce our conversation today. And as I said, feel free to interject and contribute as well. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Monica, and welcome everybody, and especially welcome Kevin. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps kick it off. Can you just give us a little bit of a brief background as your role now, and perhaps even some of your previous experience and why this inclusion topic is so important to you personally?
Yeah, so hi everyone, this is Kevin, is Chief Digital Officer for BT's Consumer Division, where we are operating under 3 different brands, EE, BT, and PlusNet. And my role is to really making sure that our digital products and services are being designed and built in such a way that accommodates everyone as in, especially those people who are in this type of demographics of accessibility, disabilities, and whatnot. And so my journey on this subject goes back to probably beyond 10 years ago, when I was in different companies like eBay and Samsung. I got introduced to this concept, and I didn't know what it was. But then more I get to know about this subject, I think there's a unbelievable amount of untapped opportunity to serve our customers in a way that you meant to serve them, because you have how you can build a product. That's all within the harnessed power that you have as a product organization. And so I thought that that was the opportunity. But more I learn about it, more I don't know about this area. So I got very inquisitive, very curious about it, and which one thing to another got me to where I'm championing and actually supporting this agenda, the role that I play. And at BT, I work closely with our senior executive members to make sure that this agenda is continued to be registered and recognized as an important strategic pillar and strategy. And so love to share some of that today in our conversations.
But so perhaps we should start there at the very top of the organization, Kevin. How has that interaction? Who's taking responsibility for this? Who's getting involved with it? Are we talking board level? Who's really helped getting involved, getting interested in this now?
Yeah, I mean, this subject has been discussed at many different levels over the last many years before even I joined the company 18 months ago. But from the board level, we have Sarah Weller, who's definitely one of our independent executive board, who's been definitely championing this subject as she has done for other companies as a board member, and down to a Able2 network, which is really our disability network within the BT group, who are championed by Howard Watson and myself in a digital. So if you think about just at the very senior executive level, we have very strong alignment as how important this is. But this is actually, it's not just top down, but it's a bottoms up, where we have a great outlets in retail. And so if you look at how we design and deploy our retail stores around the nation, we definitely have taken into a accessibility, universal design, inclusion as a core of how we design the store, and also how we train our agents and the advisors who are serving customers. So I think this has been the fabrics of what we do. I think, however, we are at the pivotal point of elevating to the next level to become a more of a strategic agenda for what BT stands for. So,
and it's fascinating, isn't it, that we've this issue of access to inclusively, should we say, where it isn't just of disabled people, it's also elderly people where services aren't available to them, and of course it's the sort of the economically unempowered so with cheaper and cheaper services. But the great news is, I think, which is that it is now it's sort of headline news, isn't it? Where it used to be very much a side discussion about almost a charity issue, when it was corporate social responsibility. But under ESG and under the broader sustainability banner, then it's suddenly become everyone seems to be much more aware of it and willing to get involved in it. I think is the great thing. But we shouldn't underestimate that with all of the permutations of disability, of diversity, all the things that Monica mentioned in the opening comment, that to actually create something which embraces everybody is a major challenge. And in a sense, it's the opposite of how we develop things in the past, where we develop things very, very simply, one size fits all, which I guess, ironically, that's where we need to go ultimately, isn't it, as well, where one size does fit all, but with that, if you like, mass customization. So I think, do you have a vision as to what that more inclusive future looks like? If you look way down the line, and then we'll come back to the details, of course. But sure. What is your vision for the long term inclusive future?
I mean, if that's a great question, and every company, every organization should have pondered at least once, if not 1,000 times, probably. Whether they execute it or not is another question. For us and for BT, if you think about what BT is for, we have a thing called the Connect for Good. And if you think about what does that mean in terms of Connect for Good, it means that, yes, we do provide connectivity services and products for customers around the country, but that also means that we have to be catered to. So I think the vision is really simple. We want to be the symbol of how we embody all individuals, regardless of their backgrounds, identities, abilities, to have an equal opportunity and then have access to the resources and services and decision-making process. And I think that's the very important mission and the vision that, especially, as someone who's working in this company or organization, decision-making process is one that I think has been most negated area. Where access to service and products are one thing that being led by giant technology companies and try to make things more accessible, whether it's Android, iOS in a digital world, or in a physical store design in a way that makes it more accommodating. But I think when I look back, I think our ultimate vision is our own employees who are in that category to be able to equally part of decision-making process, so that the decision is being informed by not just able-bodied, but rather people in a different backgrounds, different understanding of it, including the disability. So I think it's very important. But we're not quite there yet. But I think we're definitely on a path to get to the vision where everybody's actually equally participating in informing the decision of the organization.
Yes, and it's important, isn't it, that it is an employment issue. So I'm sure we'll touch upon this as we go through. That there's an employment side within BT, and then there's that whole experiential side of how that then interacts with the customers and with the broader digital ecosystem. And I think that's where we have to think. And you mentioned the brands underneath BT, the BT brand itself, the PlusNet, the EE. You think of the range of services that covers in terms of obviously fixed broadband, mobile services, and then all the devices and all the applications that people might use wherever, as whatever part of their personal and business lives. Building this inclusively in from the get-go is so important, so that people don't feel left out. Exactly. And I think and there's a generational side to that. I mentioned the elderly market previously. I think that's very, very important to say that there are there are a significant proportion of the market excluded today from the wide range of services that we can potentially support. And that's why I think telecoms is so important to this inclusively discussion, because it obviously it binds things together. It's the glue that gets people together, and the way in which we communicate is depending on the environment in which we are. So,
well, I mean, I think sorry, Chris, if I just made one thing there, I'm making it a bit more technical, but there are always this concept, and in principle that says, every human being, right, or every customer, every user are always running into some problem, some point in their journey, whether it's a login screen that doesn't work, right, when you're typing what you think is the right password, right, or you think you're buying something but you got double charged on it, or you thought you bought something but you never got received a receipt, right, and the item is misplaced, right, or the connection, you were promised a certain connection speed, but then there are all sorts of problems. And if you are in a position to designing and building that product and services, sometimes I tell the team that let's start with the edge cases or unhappy cases, because if you're able to nail those experiences, it's not just benefiting certain demographic, it's benefiting everyone, because everyone's going to be falling into that trap once, if not multiple times, whether it's a physical or digital experience. And I think it's a very important understanding that we have to provide to ourselves to say, designing for the happy case is easy, but designing for the difficult, unhappy path is probably the way we need to promote more often, because it's benefiting everyone, not just specific interest group. Yeah. And I think that's a very important concept.
How do you do that? Because, typically it's not just so much that they have more or less difficult case. We tend to design or think about people using it the way we do. So if we can hear well, we kind of naturally design for that kind of user. Same thing for if you can see well. So how can you get the people that work for you to learn to think about cases that they might not even be familiar with? They don't even understand at a personal level because they have not experienced it yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think
and it's not just a bias, it's just like we naturally tend to do that.
Yeah. And I think I would say probably there are two different tactics to do it, which I've used in the past. So it's coming from a personal experience. Let's take a group one who's, let's say, a bit more, sponsor, right? Or who actually are a business owner of the outcome. And he or she may be looking for ROI, as they should be. So one of the easiest way to build is, hey, look at this amount of X number of unhappy use cases. And now we're going to focus on it as a prioritization, because the amount of that missed opportunity is X, whether there's a revenue, whether there's the NPS churn. There are many different metrics that you can easily quantify it. And that usually works like a charm, because what the business outcome owner wants is, I want the biggest return in the investing in this product development or product service. Second thing, for those who are not less about the monetization or the ROI, but looking at never been trained, never been surrounded in that, environment. I know this is a bit biased, but one of the things that I have used in the past in other companies is that I often asked people to close their eyes and then just simply, try to use the product and how painful it is. You don't even know where to place your fingers. You don't even know where to touch. You got no geographic or geo information in your head built into it because you're not accustomed to it. So there are a lot of simple techniques that in the product development organization can easily deploy without expensive tools, expensive training, and what I call the common sense. It's almost like a walk in the shoes of someone else. So if someone is, visually impaired, all you have to do is close your ears, close your eyes. If you're dealing with or try to be impersonating someone who's not able to hear, then all you have to do is put a big headphone on, right, and put a mute button on, and then see how you're going to deal with the communication. So there's a lot of things and if you're talking about a motor disabled, individuals, so all you have to do is tape yourself up. It's pretty straightforward. So there are a lot of rudimentary technique that a lot of organizations are missing out because they're looking for a very expensive assistive technology solutions to be able to help as if that is what they're looking for. That's a lot of common sense. So my theme here is that use of common sense. That's the low cost, always works like a crazy. So.
What I really like there, Kevin, is your apart from your notion of happy and unhappy customers, is this idea of problem solving, that once a problem is solved, then that gets logged in somewhere so other people can learn from it. And because like, as a vision impaired person, I endlessly throw hissy fits when trying to use websites. So we obviously continue trying to get people to improve websites, to improve the applications on mobile devices. And I think that the ability to mine that amount of data about the problems people are having. So we need to encourage everybody who has a problem. And it's not. And of course, the great thing is it's not just true for people with disability or the elderly or the unconnected. It's true for everybody. So we will. That feedback loop is so important. And I guess one of the big changes that we see now is that, another way, which big technological changes do you see helping shape that sort of feedback loop and making it more inclusive going forward? Because we're talking all the way from, as I said, from the applications, the websites, through the devices to the service and that customer experience. So there's a lot of moving parts in there. There's a lot of technology behind that. Do you see some major changes helping build this more inclusive future?
Well, I think there are a lot of emerging technologies, even as of recent few weeks ago, ChatGPT, how that can, change the entire landscape of both personal and workplace. But I think, my answer to that, Chris, is actually going back to a software-centric approach. I think that's the fundamental, because whether you're talking about the outcome focus as in technology, right? Whether AI, machine learning, or more inclusive product, physical product, right? Or space product, it starts with someone with the ability to put a pen into the piece of white paper to start drawing something, right? Conceive an idea. How might I, or how might we able to help ... And I think if we bring that back to the core software-centric approach to build, and I'm talking about more digital, less about physical, but this is where the solution is, because this is where the beginning and the ending point of how much diverging outcome you're going to create. That meaning that one is very stereotypical, able-bodied focus and services because it's easier to scale. But the other one is one that you accommodate pretty much every different type of customer segmentations, slower to the go-to-market with more variants you have to accommodate, takes longer from a software development cycle perspective. However, the outcome, if you're thinking about that, is probably times 5 that you can expect the outcome over time. But I think that this is where the mindset too, Chris, I think you and I talked about before, but it's about how do we change the mindset of people, those who are in position to make the right decision, because the wrong decision can cost us catastrophic consequences, not only just the investment, but also the change management of once you have built, it's really hard to undo, and try to do things on top of things that you have done without the inclusion thinking behind it. It's costly. And I've seen many times where organizations couldn't do it not because they don't want to do it, but it's too expensive for them to rewrite the code that they once wrote it without thinking about inclusion as a part of the core way they need to think about the software development. So,
yeah, no, we've seen this many times, haven't we? About one of the mantras is no regression. You know, that you might create a more inclusive application 1 minute, and then actually by renewing the application, by having a different organization or different people writing the code for it, suddenly the accessibility disappears. And we've seen many examples of that over the years. And it's just making sure it's there front and center in thinking. And I think one thing to emphasize for people in the audience may not be aware of this, that the way we designed assistive technology in the past was very specific to each disability. Mm-hmm. So there was a whole ecosystem around the hearing impaired. There was a whole ecosystem around visually impaired, and increasingly there's an ecosystem around cognitively impaired. Physically impaired in some ways is much easier. You say like building accessible retail outlets and so on, and accessible offices and the like. So, but there's so many things to think about, and technology used to be very specific to people like me with a vision problem or to someone with a hearing problem. And actually, the opportunity is there, having this, using a software-centric approach as you described, and having especially the mobile device, but obviously in the home, other device as well, to actually give people that much more access and to render the information and the communication in a way that's easy for the individual to consume. It's as I think you mentioned before, the ROI is actually much easier than many people think, because the number of disabled people, with roughly 1 billion people in the world, 15% of the population have some form of disability. So addressing that with their spending power, and everybody wants to be part of the digital revolution, and gain the benefits, as you say, buying something online and benefiting from that, or consuming content, or joining in, collaborating in other ways. So,
I mean, I think that,
please go.
No, I mean, I think there are examples. I mean, the reason I mentioned about the software-centric approach is the answer to many of these questions that we have still outstanding. But the good news is the industry itself has moved quite quickly in the last probably decade. Where if you look at all those like native, products that we are enjoying, every day, Android, iOS, Mac, PC. If you look at what's coming with them as a default settings, right? There are a lot of this accessibility inclusion features already being built, and those things only getting sophisticated. And as a matter of fact, I think we talked about it last time, but dark mode, right? Which is a lot of people start using it. It's actually came out of one of those thinking, right? It's like, wait a minute, I'm an able-bodied, but looking at the white background, app or web all day long is hurting my eyes. And how can I go into the more, So I think there's a lot of things that we start to see that not only those customers and users who fall into this category, what these features are for, although they might have a starting point. Now what we start to see, and what I start to see, is people with able bodies start to access those features as a part of the accommodation for their needs, whether they admit it or not. And I think this is a really great demonstration and an evidence that industry itself has been migrated and moved towards that more inclusion or inclusive software-centric culture. Having said that, I think there's still lots of opportunity that we haven't been able to capitalize yet.
But I think that one thing to keep in mind is that it's not like you're able-bodied or disabled, or there's a lot of in between or transient solutions. Like if you have eye surgery for a few days, you don't see well, and then so there is all sorts of or you might see but not, or you might not be able to see at night. So there's all sorts of things. But I wanted to ask you a question from somebody in the audience. And, I think, as you said, as you point out, it's important to have a sort of holistic approach. So it's not just dealing one type of disability at a time. But the question is about people that have hearing problems, and for whatever reasons, they not want to use text or sign language. And clearly that's also, like for some of them, you just don't want to focus on one type of disability, but sometimes you do need a specific way to address some of them. Is there anything you're doing to address the sort of hearing issues that do not require text? So basically, you change the signal, the auditory signal, so that it's easier for people to hear or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good question because, we, tend to focus on very stereotypical sort of demographic, right? When it comes to an accessibility inclusion, like a visually impaired or whatnot. But I think the challenge with the looking at different demographics across, I think is exactly the point of this conversation is about. We have to have people who actually genuinely care about every demographics, but B actually has underlying understanding and information about what is it that proper interventions or solutions that we need to have. Because I think going back to what I said about earlier, the very basics, right? Ways that we can help people who are able to design and build the right product and services, right, without investing too much cost or investment in the assistive technology. It is the same thing. So I think currently I don't have a very clear answer to that question with the hearing impaired, because I think this is one area that we have been started looking into it. Because if you think about both colleague experience and then you think about the customer experience, these are where two sort of pendulum that you need to focus on. And I think right now, as a BT, as a part of the Able2 network and also accessibility team we have across, we'll start to really looking at holistically, types of different disabilities and accessibility inclusion, and understand the proportion of it, and then understand the proper ways for us to build a strategy that actually allow us to actually scale. Because one of the benefit of a company like BT is we can scale once we get it right. Now, the most difficult part is getting to the first step of understanding who are those in our colleague aspects and then our customer demographics, and then understand the opportunity. And then once you understand the opportunity, what is a proper solution that we need to invest in building it so that we can serve them at the right time or place, as opposed to overpromise and then actually ended up in someone who doesn't use it.
So what's interesting there, Kevin, is that this sort of taking an example like hearing impaired really makes you think about all the different steps in the process. Because in the past we've had specialist devices, specialist handsets for the fixed network, that were big buttons for the visually impaired, let's say, but also with booster signal on it to boost the volume of the voice, and obviously the voice, we sort of, in some ways, we neglect voice, don't we, in the digital world? We think it's much more about the app, and then perhaps the voice is embedded in another app like WhatsApp or Teams or whatever. But actually, keep the higher quality voice we can deliver, the better, and boosting the signal depending on the range of hearing that somebody might have. Actually tuning, and I'm putting words into your mouth here, but tuning the service in the future to somebody with a particular level of hearing problem, that's what a hearing aid does. The hearing aid amplifies what's happening at the mid-range, let's say, for a lot of people. So actually we're taking some of that might be in the part of an end device, and we may well have the intelligence in the network and in whatever the CPE and end device is, to be able to actually tune it. And obviously we all use examples from our own families. My 90-year-old mother, she prefers to be happens to be on an EE mobile device, but she can hear much better on the mobile device than she can on a fixed line, which is BT, by the way. But that's to do with the devices that she's using. Right. But I think that knowledge of the knowledge of the customer and the willingness to share that information with your identity, whether.
Well, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head right there. The reason that I said what I said earlier is because if you think about the permeation, right, of, let's call it those digital devices, right, and if you think about just from two manufacturers, right, where you got dozens of manufacturers. So if you think about Samsung, they got category of XYZ, Apple, right? Generation XYZ. And every single one of those has a permutation of technology capability, right? So this is where going back to the beauty and the beast part of the software, centric approach, when you start to build something, there are innate capability that each manufacturer built into their release of each those phones or devices. And they aren't a constant, they're always changing. And I think, being able to tune into that, and because if you think about even haptic, is something that we are very invested in a lot in our sort of software-centric approach. Why? Because it is one of those unused the sensor or sensory feedback that people are understanding what to do with it, and it's a very much assisted, complementary, right, supporting sensory feedback that we all know how to touch something, and if it's just extruded, we know something that you can push. There's affordance to it, right? If something is not recessed, so there's a lot of cues that people have acquired through the physical environment, and that in the digital, that's an equivalent to, right, the physical affordance of something that how to operate in the physical world. Digital will be something more like haptic, for example, or visual. Sort of the breadcrumbs that follows you every time you click something that you actually click on something. So there's a lot of different ways to complement different types of, those accessibility group. But again, the challenge is actually coming back to this permeation of so many different specs and technical requirements. They're ever so changing pretty much every year. And I think that is really one of the challenging for this particular area. To be able to say, because, for example, Chris, I don't know what kind of phone you have, right? So for us to be able to ask not one, but 100,000s of customers, it's very daunting and not scalable. So I think there's a lot of going back to that, the common denominator, but yet leveraging different sensorial feedback that native devices offer today. I think it's one of the short focus that every organization should have, right?
One of the questions that obviously, being a visually impaired person, which fits in with what you were just saying, is that of course I'm continually listening for messages whilst also on calls like this, and actually, so my audio channels get completely clogged. So I would much rather have a haptic feedback to say there's a message coming for you, or there's another call waiting for you, or something like that. So it's using the range of services available to you. And what it also brings out, Kevin, and it sort of touches back on your previous work before BT, is that the need for the broader industry to work together. Obviously we'll talk a bit more about what you're doing within BT in a second, but relationships with other people outside, how do you see that evolving, the broader digital ecosystem relationships?
Well, I think it's very important. I would say that's probably one of the areas that a lot of companies need to do a better job of it. This is one area that you don't need to compete. This is the area that you need to actually create a alliance, right? Because not a single company out there that can solve this problem by themselves. So like when we think about how does industry or changing industry, right, need to bring the people along the way. Well, we talked about earlier about digital literacy and education. To me, that's one of the underpinning, the foundation. But from company to company, I think there's a level that private sectors can do to help, working with the government. There's a private sectors can do with the nonprofits, and there's a private sectors can benefit from each other by actually working together to help on marginalized communities, right? So it is about going back to the mindset change about, while we should promote companies to compete one another for the betterment of the outcome, and then bring more technology advancement solutions to the customers to help, this particular area is one for me is really requires more deep integration, deep partnership to win together, because I think that's has been the biggest barrier in the industry across all. And because if you just look at between the Samsung and Apple, not that I want to pick those two examples, but they're not collaborating on this subject either. They have their own set of ways that they accommodate my Apple users and then my Android users. And I think if you look at, same feature cross-check, some are common, but some are very differently developed.
Yeah. Well, as in, there's no standard shortcuts for things like Zoom or WebEx or Teams. They're all very different, all different shortcuts. Exactly. Which we all need to use it. So
the one thing though is that so there's one thing. It would be nice to have more sort of consistency across interfaces. But do you see a role for regulation or standardization to sort of underpin this type of development?
I had spent about nearly 5 years in healthcare before. And if you think about healthcare, it's all about regulated, right? Like finance is another regulated, but to the point where the fintech, kind of liberated with open banking. But if you think about the healthcare, we're in the business of saving lives of people, is heavily regulated. Personal opinion, I think this particular area of accessibility inclusion, to a certain degree, needs to be regulated, in my opinion, because when we think about the society and the growth of society and then the community, right? When more you create a marginalized group, whether it's financially excluded, that's a marginalized group. Literacy, that's another marginalized group, because if you're not literate, you're not able to access some of the digital tools, right? Or even a cost that you can afford to have, or this like accessibility inclusion group. So I think this is where the balance, when I said earlier about the private sector needs to work with the government, isn't about just lobbying the benefits that they need to gain through the regulation, but rather encouraging government sectors to understand the role that they have to play. And I think different parts of countries, the United States, where I come from, I think, it's a very different spectrum. If you think about their ways of their government is pushing is different from European countries. And if you decompose European, it's very different from the UK versus the rest of pan-Europe. So I think, but I do believe the government has a big play in this space. And I don't think we've seen enough of them doing their job, not to penalize them, not to criticize them, but it's about their roles that I believe that every sector has to play. And I think the private sector's job is to bring that advancement of technology, because they have a willpower, they have a commitment, they have a technical expertise to do so, but then that's to be married with some level of regulations, so that, because of what to me the role of the government is about, to provide a fair chance to everyone. I don't think government's job is to siding with the one particular interest party. Yeah. That's what the private sector needs to do. What the government needs to do is to neutralize that, to say, okay, I hear you, but these are the set of requirements that I expect to see in all places. And I think that's something that personally I like to see more, so that the private sector can be more united in delivering those consistent features and services.
And I think that's also important to think about the fact that, we talk about smart cities and smart citizens and the like, making sure that every service that gets built in your community is accessible to everybody. Yes. And that those channels of the interaction channels are open to everyone. The impact on the customer experience, as an industry, we talk a lot about customer experience, Kevin. Can you talk a bit about what you've done with all the different channels of communication open to you and to the customers? You mentioned the physical outlets, the retail outlets in one of your early comments, but then about the contact centers, chat boxes, all those things. How do you? What's your vision for that? Where are we on the development of that to be inclusive today?
Well, I mean, I think that I will probably reframe the question and removing the word vision.
Okay.
Vision is such a out there, but I mean, I think if you look at what I'm going to take that, what we are doing at BT, right, and what we have been doing. I think if you look at across our contact center, but also retail, particularly, and a digital channel, we have been doing a lot in this space already that I think some of the customers will recognize. The floor plan, that allow us to make sure there's a minimum space, right, for the wheelchair, access to be able to come in without hitting the different, installations and whatnot. To really training our frontline colleagues to be sensible and sensitive about dealing with different types of customers, particularly in this area. We have have hearing induction loops for those who are, with the hearing aids. Store staff, like I said, for example, we have extended their appointment time for an hour. The reason being is because for certain customers, you come in and go out, within 15 minutes. Some requires extra care, extra help, extra time, whether it's to understand, to actually being able to accommodate different dexterity or different types of comprehension or different impairment. So I think, when you look at the amount of the evidences we have put in place, what I call as a hygiene factors is there. And I think that where I hope and we hope to be able to go is based on the strong hygiene factor or foundations, understanding where we need to go. For example, there's an interesting stat where, we've been able to help customers. This is interesting aspects of accessibility, right? In a very far-fetched idea, but it is reasonably close. So cybersecurity, right, is another area that I think we are all exposed to it. Once your stuff is hacked, right, and seen as a vulnerable, we are all a victim of, having a, sort of the handicap or the disability in certain aspects, because you don't have access to your information or your account has been, compromised. Therefore, you have to deal with a lot of backdoor processes to reconcile your account that you are not responsible for. And so, one of the things that we've been doing is actively educating our customer to say, hey, when you buy this handset, and with our EE, for example, we highly recommend that you want to bundle that with the cybersecurity service that we offer. Why? Because you want to make sure that you want to protect your information. And for example, we nearly have as high as every 4 handset we sell, we're able to help customers to buy one cybersecurity. And it's not just about sales, but it's about level setting the understanding of the threat and what damage it can have on you, whether that's psychological damage or it could be a physical damage, meaning that you have to be limited time and you have to now go back and forth and correcting your account. So when we think about this whole area of accessibility, there are the spectrum of very stereotypical aspects to even this example I just shared with you, which is where we're taking a great care in terms of understanding that this is an area we can do better. So we are actually doing it, like cybersecurity, which is one form of the collateral damage can have on anybody for that matter, to a upstream, like, all the things that we talked about today with the hearing impaired, or the visually impaired aspects of customers as well.
It's interesting because that's that extension of the service. It's not just the endpoint, isn't just the device. It's people's information, it's the contacts. It probably even extends into the home, and we might extend into 100%. Home and managing it and supporting it. And of course, the example I often use is, my mother has a Doro phone, which the engineers cannot connect with. They cannot ping it to see what the phone's doing. So upgrading it to a smartphone where actually then it is an extension of the network and is much better able to be supported remotely, because we do need to think about that as well. That's really important issue. Can we move on a little bit internally?
May I ask one
Monica,
thing? One final thing. There is a level of internationality here because you mentioned security, but also the kind of security threats and the security issues that are around disabled people might be different. So there might be things that if you're not able to see, for instance, you might have trouble to use some of the kind of security safeguards that you'd use otherwise. How should we think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's going back to the, I feel like I'm going to draw all the answer to the digital literacy and education, but in many ways it is, because if you think about how everyone, think about the problem and then reverse engineer to, okay, this is a solution I want to build. But then because the solution you're going to try to usually build is for these certain demographics, less about the inclusive of everyone, whether it's because lack of resource, lack of time, lack of budget. There are many, many excuses as to how you want to prioritize certain things. But not to say it's wrong, but I think it's really going back to the understanding, what is the collateral damage of not doing it, and going back to what I said earlier about unhappy use case or unhappy customer journeys, and then understand how that actually pertains to not just certain demographic, but all demographics. And if you think about cybersecurity, there is no selection of criteria. If you think about those hackers and those bots that are running around and try to hijack your accounts, your informations, make a falsely transaction that claims that that's you, but it's not fact, it's you. All that is something that we are all exposed to it. So I think, this is where I said earlier about SBT, we are looking at totality of all this possibility where it can happen, from very stereotypical to the even non, but then really focus on education, so content. So if you think about what we do across internal and external, we put a lot of effort in content education, because that is something that we feel we obligated to help people to educate about what that might mean for you in terms of whether phone smart or mobile smart. What does that mean? What does it mean by using this amount of data? What does it mean for the sustainability story? What does that mean for the cybersecurity, and what does that mean what you need to do? So all that is part of very foundational recognition that you are understanding the value. Now, it doesn't solve all the problem, but it starts with really creating that shared understanding. I think is a key. And of course, for us to have a content that can be read for those that are not able to read, and then the fact that we have different accessibility requirement across our digital entities, it is just another way for us to cater to different types. But I would say, that's probably the, where we need to focus more of educating, because that is something that a lot of companies are negating because they're solely relying on solutions, but sometimes what people are looking for is content that I can be better understood about implications, risks, and exposure to some of the vulnerability are sometimes the first step in understanding and avoiding some of the unfortunate consequences that sometimes we run ourselves into.
So let's change angle a little bit and talk about internally within BT. We've talked a lot about externally and what you're doing for customers. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing internally and how diverse a workforce you have today and how you see that evolving?
Yeah, and I think, as I said, this is something that I'm very proud of what BT has done and continue to do. So, we have very diverse workforce today as a BT group. For example, we have close to about 30% female representation globally, and that translates into about 20% ethnic minority representation in the UK. And then within that, if you think about the it's about 7.3%. I think that's the last time I found out from the HR system that actually disability representation. Of course, as you know, that if a person does not indicate or choose to not indicate, then there's no way we are able to capture. But for those who have expressed, we have that 7.3% of disability representation in our employment base. So, and then what that means is that it's definitely higher than our respective tech profession and workforces across the UK, because average female technical or tech representation is about 18%. So if you think about us being 29%, we definitely are treading above the average. And the average industry here in the tech nation in the UK is about 15% ethnicity. Again, like I said, we are about 19.8 or 20% treading there. So we're definitely, doing higher than the rest of the industry. And about 6.4% for that's about average. Again, we're about 7.3. So I think if you just look at the stats, we definitely put a lot of efforts and investment and care to create this very much inclusion of the company and culture and employment opportunity for everyone. But there are more work to be done. And because it's not about just the hiring, but it's about retention, right? It's about retaining those people to continue to employ by this company, that they feel proud of it, they feel very comfortable working in the environment. So, we basically have, like I said, able to network body that has been going on that really helps us to voicing the needs of those employees for disability priorities that we need to focus on year over year. And some of the examples is basically we set up this colleague board, at the lower career level so that their voice is captured, and then the bottoms up process rather than top down initiative to reflecting every voice from the bottom and the entry level. And then we have the disability advocacy program. It really helps upskilling the managers and colleagues. Again, it's going back to the education literacy, right? To make sure that they're constantly surrounded by this narrative, surrounded by this, ambitions that we have, to have that perspective. And of course, the some of the workplace adjustment process that we are constantly monitoring and evolving. So, there are a lot of exciting things are happening, and our job and my job is to make sure that we're exposing that as much as we can so that people feel like it's nothing unique rather than they're surrounded by, and this is the way we work in this company. And I think we're definitely making progress, but more work to be done.
I guess one extension of that, though, is the people, the younger people coming in who are generally more code centric and technology aware. I think we need to make sure not only that it's within places like BT, but within the education system, that accessibility and inclusion is taught at that level. I saw something recently about teaching marketing, making it part of a marketing degree, that people are much more aware of this, of how diverse the market is. And I guess that's the case when coming into an organization like BT. You've got some structures in place which allow people to come in with the more diverse group to come in, and then to continually feed that through the organization. So it's certainly to be applauded.
And I think
I say something is well, first of all, it's congratulations, great results. But one thing that really struck me about what you were saying that you're doing is that there are specific things you're doing for the people that are the diverse group, but also it's an effort that is company wide. So everybody has to work towards it. It's not just those people, so to say. There's something that everybody has to do, and I think that this is really important.
100%, and this is where I keep saying this. This cannot be the top down. Yes, there has to be champions, but it's about the embedment to the culture. I think the value that you are standing for, and this is where I think will be interesting for the next year or two, as the tech sectors have laid off so many people, unfortunately, and they all admitted that they hired too many. But as a company evolves, guess what? Some of the people is going to look for. They're going to probably looking for the value that not just monetary value, but value that can I side with the value that you're standing for. Because I think at the grand scheme of where it's going, I believe the companies such as BT will, as we have been long-standing, will continue to be long-standing, not because of the short-term revenue targets and the EBITDA target, but rather these type of aspects that every company, not just BT, needs to stand for. And I think I'm just glad to be part of the organization who care top to bottom, bottom to top. And even, for example, like, one of my wish lists is spend more time with one of our colleagues who's actually are visually impaired, who's part of the accessibility team. He's been a fantastic addition to the organization, brings a load of insights, a load of fun personality. It just makes things so natural. It's not like, oh my God, I need to work carefully. No, I just treat you the way I know be treated.
Well, it makes it real, doesn't it? Yeah.
It makes it authentic, genuine, 100%. Yes. Yeah. So I think that's the value that people need to realize. That's who we are as a human.
So let's go from real to artificial. So what about artificial intelligence and the role that it's very topical at the moment? Do you see big roles for that in helping the inclusive design?
100%. I think with the caveat of how it needs to be developed and deployed ethically and inclusively, again, going back to the software-centric approach that I mentioned earlier, but some of the benefits are pretty clear, Chris. AI can help bridge all forms of digital. I'm talking about just digital only division through number one, like affordable connectivity, where artificial intelligence can help optimizing network planning and deployment, for example, where if currently mentioned by the human being, soon AI is going to run and make sure that can provide the most optimized at the cost that you don't have to pay surplus on top of. So that's definitely one area that we've already seen in many places in the connectivity space, not just telco, but in other sectors. Low-cost devices where machine learning, right, the form of where it informs artificial intelligence, can help optimize hardware, software performance. Again, this is going back to the manufacturability, development cycle, how AI can actually help reduce the further cost that could incur, especially as we use some of the high-end components that drive up the cost. So it helps our organization to lower the cost, which then means that we can provide that services and products at a much more affordable cost for the end customers. And then another third area that I see that's happening already that will happen more is a content translation, right? Mm-hmm. You've seen that already, but real-time translation services, content summarization, which is like ChatGPT, this is the exact benefit of someone who's been painstakingly taking hours and days to translate and providing and uploading to the software, and then the boom, app goes out to live, which takes an entire 2 months cycle. This is where the real time can happen, which is already happening. So again, if you think at this, those three examples, it's very much examples are already happening in our lives, but will continue to happen more pervasively. Yeah. And that, but again, my emphasis is really that we have to do it inclusively, ethically, and that's the jury is still out there that we don't know yet what the collateral damage it will have on humanity. But until then, we just hope that everyone does the right thing.
Well, one potential issue is that AI, since it draws on the data that is available out there, and our society has its own biases, that you can basically keep those biases or even amplify those biases once you use AI. Do you have a sense of, is that a real issue with inclusivity? And if so, how do we deal with it?
Can you repeat the question?
So the AI could just introduce or amplify the biases that we have in society.
I think this is the question for another time. But so far, I don't know if you saw, but the founder of OpenAI made already public statements that he's already scared what he has seen, what ChatGPT can do, and that sums up the environment that we already are exposed to. And I think my ask for anybody who understands the AI and generative AI space and who wants to eager to touch on the set of codes to try to generate something, please, I beg you to be mindful of what collateral damage you're about to create. This isn't about fun exercise. This is about the perpetual impact and then the damage you can have. And our job is to benefit human race. I mean, that's what we're here for. If you're yourself as a technologist, your job is to help benefiting people. And I think this is too early for that technology. But I think, there's a lot of advocates that I've seen right around the world who's been really actively involved in questioning, driving some countermeasures, both on the government side, which is good because you need a tension between private sector who does to drive this latest, greatest technology. But again, it's going back to what I said earlier, that's what the government needs to really help stepping in. It's not just a few individuals within academia raising concern, but rather healthy debate. And one could argue that it may slow down the inventions and innovations. But sometimes I feel like the speed is not the solution. Sometimes a thoughtful conversation, the inclusion, right, is taking us along a pole. And I think often we race for the quick turnaround, and that's something that we need to resist.
And thank you, Kevin. And let's draw this to a conclusion. We could keep talking for many hours about the subject. And I think we agree that the bottom up and top down approach is essential within organizations like BT, but within 100%. Every organization. There's a lot around that. I think there are some short-term hits. I think we would agree that the human element and understanding and the culture is something that we need to make sure is right. It sounds like you're building that, and that's getting success within BT. That just thinking about every way that anybody as a customer will interact with it. That you mentioned even changing the font and the color scheme on the router that people get with their broadband. You know, all these things will help, and ultimately the ROI will be there. So I think all of those things we've touched upon are really useful. We will write this up and summarize and share with people. I'm sure we'll have many more interactions. Monica, any last question, or should we hand back to Kendra?
I think we should hand back to Kendra and let everybody go back to their own life.
Exactly. But thanks,
Kevin.
Great
Too much
stuff.
of their time. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
All right. That will conclude our Inclusively webinar for today. Thanks again to our speakers for that great conversation. A on-demand version of this webinar will be made available in the coming days. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.